I recently got my CDL license, and since then, I've been traveling all across the country seeing different states, cities, and small towns. For the most part, all of my loads and unloads have been smooth. I've driven through rough neighborhoods and even ghost towns, but nothing ever sent a chill down my spine like Hollow Creek, Vermont. The night I went was a random Friday. I had just finished delivering a load to a warehouse in Burlington when my boss called and asked me to pick up another load from Hollow Creek, about an hour away. I checked the time. It was getting close to midnight. Normally I would have complained, but I was off the next day, so I just shrugged it off, hopped in my truck, and started driving. On the way there, something already felt off. I'd never been asked to pick up a load that late before. As I got closer, a thick fog started rolling in. It was so dense that even my headlights felt useless, barely cutting through the gray. Still, I kept driving. Eventually, I passed a large sign on the side of the highway, "Welcome to Hollow Creek," and that's when things really started to feel wrong. I called my boss and asked exactly where I needed to go. He told me to head to a district called Rowan Ridge. As I drove deeper into Rowan Ridge, the city disappeared. There was nothing but miles of cornfields stretching out on both sides of the road. No houses, no lights, just darkness and crops swaying in the wind. Then I saw a warehouse sitting alone in the middle of all that land. No parking lot, no loading dock, nothing. I pulled up anyway. I stepped out of my truck, expecting someone to be waiting, but there was no one. The place was dead silent, so I walked over to a side door and knocked. No answer. That's when the uneasiness really set in. I was standing in the middle of nowhere, in a place I didn't know, surrounded by nothing but cornfields, and it was past midnight. I decided to call my boss and let him know no one was there, but when I walked back to my truck, the door was locked. My stomach dropped. My keys were inside. My phone was inside. I was stuck. I let out a frustrated sigh, then heard something rustle behind me. I immediately spun around, but there was nothing. All right, I muttered to myself. I'll just walk down the road. Find a house or a barn. Someone's got to have a phone. So I started walking. 10 minutes passed, or at least it felt like 10 minutes. It could have been longer. The whole time, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following me. Every few steps, I turned around. Nothing. Then, in the distance, I saw a house with the porch light on. Relief hit me instantly. I started walking faster toward it, but as I did, that same fog rolled back in, thicker than before. Within seconds, I couldn't see anything. I kept moving in what I thought was the right direction, but suddenly, I wasn't on the road anymore. I was in the cornfield. Panic set in immediately. I tried to turn around, tried to find my way back, but no matter which direction I went, it felt like I was only getting deeper. That's when I saw it. A scarecrow. But something about it wasn't right. The sack on its head didn't look like cloth. It looked like leather. Its body, stuffed with hay, looked wrong. Like something was underneath it. Something real or alive. I stood there, confused and scared. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. I turned to see another scarecrow. Then another. And another. My chest tightened as they were forming a circle around me. Slowly, they started walking closer. My brain couldn't process what I was seeing. None of it made sense. And then the fear that had me frozen in place snapped. So, I ran. I ran faster than I ever have in my life, pushing through the corn, not caring where I was going, just trying to get away. Behind me, I heard them. Running, keeping up with me. Their footsteps, if you could even call them that, were crashing through the field. I didn't dare look back at first, but when I did, I wish I hadn't. Their mouths were hanging open, their bodies moved wrong, and they were gaining on me. Tears streamed down my face. This isn't real, I kept telling myself. This can't be real, I screamed for help. Then something grabbed my shoulder. I was yanked to the ground before I could even react. They were all around me, closing in, reaching for me. I shut my eyes. I knew it was over. Then, bang. The sound was deafening. I covered my ears as another shot rang out. I opened my eyes. An older man stood there with a shotgun. He reached down, grabbed my arm, and pulled me to my feet with surprising strength. I looked around and realized something that didn't make sense. because we were right in front of the house, the same one I had seen earlier. I didn't question it. I just ran inside. He followed close behind, slammed the door shut, and locked it. Then he leaned his shotgun against it. He turned to me. "You, the trucker supposed to pick up the load?" he asked. I nodded, still shaking. He sighed and sat down. "I was supposed to help you load up," he said. "Told your boss to delay you until morning." Clearly he didn't listen. I didn't know what to say. I was still trying to understand what I had just gone through. The old man stood up and walked over to me. He looked me dead in the eyes. "The evil in those fields," he said quietly, "it preys on the living." He paused. "I've seen a lot of good men fall to it." Then his voice softened just a bit. "You're one of the lucky ones." I stayed in that house until sunrise. When morning came, he drove me back to my truck. We managed to get the door open, loaded up the cargo, and I left without looking back. And I can promise you this, I will never return to Hollow Creek. It was the summer of 2014. My parents and I were heading to a remote area of the Olympic Peninsula for a summer getaway. We didn't often go on trips, as money was always tight in our family. This year, my parents wanted to do something special for my 13th birthday. I'd always wanted to go camping, and I loved the outdoors, especially the forest. There was something about forests that always fascinated me. Perhaps the mystical feeling that came with entering the thick greenery of the Pacific Northwest. I knew from a young age that trees carry memory. Most trees I saw were older than I was, and I always wondered what their stories were. The forest was my safe place. I never much cared for the concrete jungle. Much like my father, I was, and still am, very much an introvert, preferring nature over people or anything man. As we pulled up to our camping spot, my heart jumped with glee. I hopped out of our Dodge Caravan and raced into the woods. My mother called after me, "Make sure you stay close and get back before dark." I turned and nodded at her while my father began to unload the van. I skipped off through the trees, admiring the wooden giants and the sounds that echoed throughout the woods. Birds singing, cicadas humming, and the occasional twig snap from wildlife. Or so I thought. On my mini-adventure, I found a towering giant. Its trunk looked almost carved out to the perfect size for a child. My height, as if it had grown just for me. I trotted excitedly into the trunk, gazing up, mesmerized by the life inside. Spiders and beetles alike were all taking up residence in this ancient, natural structure. I thought they were beautiful and mesmerizing in every way. I must have spent a good half hour in that tree when silence engulfed the forest. How strange, I thought, as I knew the forest normally grew louder as the night approached. I peeked my head out from the stump, scanning the forest for any life. Silence. The forest went from gleaming with life to looking dull and benign. I stepped out hesitantly. Something wasn't right. Through the silence, a loud, piercing sound echoed through the woods. It was so unexpected I almost jumped out of my skin. It sounded like a chainsaw. I assumed someone must be trimming trees or something, so I didn't think much of it. Again, silence filled the forest, and the sun began to disappear. I remembered my mother's words and began making my way back to our campsite, imagining a pitched tent and a fire ready for marshmallows. Through the darkening forest, I could just barely make out the van and sprinted toward it in excitement. As I approached, I noticed the absence of anything related to camping. The only things unloaded from the van were a cooler and my father's fishing rod, which lay flat on the ground. That struck me as odd, as my father took great pride in his fishing rod. He never just left it on the ground, fearing it would be stepped on and snapped. I looked around the campsite, but my parents were nowhere in sight. "Mom? Dad?" I called, but there was no answer. Fear crawled up my spine as darkness filled the forest and an unbearable silence filled the air. I called for them again, louder, but still no answer. I didn't have a phone yet at that age, and normally I wouldn't have needed one. I glanced around and didn't see either of my parents' phones anywhere. We were miles from the nearest person, as the campsites were spaced very comfortably apart to ensure a secluded experience. I opened the van's sliding door and sat in the passenger seat. They must be out collecting wood for the fire, I thought. It was the only logical conclusion I could reach. So, I waited in the van, expecting them to return swiftly. Hours went by. My surroundings were black as ink. My mind started racing, wondering where they were and if something had happened. I scoured the vehicle for a flashlight and found one of our battery-operated lanterns. I switched it on and hesitantly left the safety of the van. There was a small path leading into the woods from our campsite. Thinking maybe they had followed the path and gotten lost, I began down it. There was still no sound other than my footsteps as I reluctantly made my way farther and farther from our campsite. I began calling them again, hoping maybe they'd follow the sound of my voice. It had to be close to midnight by now, but I had no way to tell the time. About 10 minutes down the path, that roaring sound rattled the trees again. The sound of a chainsaw. But closer this time. Who would be cutting trees at this hour? I stopped in my tracks and listened, and then a blood-curdling scream harmonized with the teeth-clenching, mechanized sound. "Mom," I yelled, sure that it was her voice. I'd never heard her scream before, but what other woman would have been this deep into the woods? Stupidly, I ran toward where I heard the heart-wrenching noises. The dark woods fell silent once again, with nothing but my frantic footsteps and shaky voice echoing around me. I realized, far too late, that I had strayed from the path. I stopped and turned my lantern in every direction, but there was no clear path in sight. I was breathing heavily, my body was shaking in absolute terror. Where were my parents? What was that noise? Was that really my mother screaming? Out of the darkness behind me, I heard heavy footsteps heading toward me. I froze, unable to move, and braced myself for the worst. A hand grasped my mouth as I almost let out a scream. A man stepped in front of me and put his finger to his lips, gesturing for me to stay quiet. It was my father. Thank God, I thought, as a feeling of relief washed over me. I wasn't alone anymore. That relief quickly vanished as my eyes met his. I'd never seen such terror in his eyes. As I brought my lantern closer, I noticed blood splattered across his entire being. My eyes mirrored his terror. I whispered, "Dad, what's going on? Where's Mom?" "Follow me slowly and quietly. We have to go now," he replied sternly, though his voice shook with fear. "Where's Mom?" I heard a scream. He cut me off, grabbing me by the shoulders. "Mom will be waiting at the van for us. Let's go." He grabbed my hand, and we attempted to make our way back. We walked slowly, as carefully as we could without snapping any twigs. As minutes turned into hours, it became very apparent, even with my father's guidance, that we were lost. A few yards behind us, we heard a series of branches snap as something barreled toward us at unnatural speeds. My father ripped the lantern from me and looked around frantically. We spotted the hollowed-out tree I had found earlier. He raced me over to it and shoved me into the child-sized gap in the trunk. In the blink of an eye, a black mass swallowed my father and the light in his hand. I covered my mouth with my hands, attempting to stay silent as he had told me. The teeth-grinding, chainsaw sound pierced my eardrums, and a thick, wet substance splattered across my face. The lantern fell to the ground in the middle of the violent attack. And then I saw it. My father, being torn to shreds. Flesh, blood, and bone were flung every which way. My eyes widened and my stomach sank as the light illuminated the black creature. It was tall, like a man, and covered in dark, greasy hair. Not like animal fur, but like a person who hadn't bathed or groomed in years. The hair hung off the creature, dripping with blood. Its claws, which were ripping through my father, were long and human-like, sharp as razors and bony like a skeleton. Its body was shaped like an ape's, but lankier and much larger. Its face, it didn't have one. It was just a skull, resembling a deer's but with the teeth of a predator. Protruding from the skin and hair around its neck, it looked as if a disease had been eating through the flesh of its face. It grasped my father high off his feet, tearing him to pieces in a matter of seconds. My loving father was nothing but a pile of gore scattered across the forest floor. Silence befell the woods once again as the creature huffed in exhaustion, yet carried a lingering energy. It didn't even eat the prey it had just shredded. It was hunting for sport. It was hunting for sport. The lantern began to flicker out as the creature turned its head toward me. My heart pounded against my chest. Tears streamed down my face, and my hands remained clamped over my mouth. I could see my life flash before my eyes. I was sure I was about to join my father in the mess on the ground. Everything went black. I must have passed out from the fear. I didn't expect to wake up. I awoke the next morning with a camp ranger carrying me in a blanket. As I fluttered my eyes open, hoping I had just had a horrible nightmare, the ranger's gaze met mine. He had an awful look of pity and despair. "Where are my parents?" I asked, already knowing the terrible answer. "Authorities are on their way, and we will get to the bottom of it then." Tears flooded my eyes as I recalled the night before. The police identified the attack as a bear mauling. I told them what I had seen over and over, but they looked at me like I was insane. They assumed my imagination had filled in the blanks of a bear attack in the dark. But I knew what happened. I knew what was out there. They found my mother's scattered remains about a mile into the woods. They must have known the attack was unnatural, but I don't blame them for not believing a 13-year-old talking about a beast with a skull for a face and razors for hands. I know I didn't imagine it. That was no bear. To this day, I will not go into the woods because I know that thing is still out there. I open my eyes, stretch, and yawn. God, I feel good. Pain-free for the first time in a long time. I move my limbs. They are not stiff or sore, which is surprising, but good. In fact, my foremost sensation is one of hunger, a deep, insatiable hunger. I feel as if I haven't eaten anything for an eternity. I last remember a Roman soldier holding a cloth dipped in wine on the tip of his spear to my parched mouth. Not to help me, the cunt, but to keep the agony alive longer. Ah, well, it is all in the past now. I rise. The stone floor feels cool beneath the soles of my feet. I look with interest at the jagged holes in my feet. I can see the gray stone through the holes. Bits of my bones poke through the red flesh, together with some dangling veins and nerves. I wonder what happened to the nails. I look at the holes in my hands, slowly turning them over, and touch my sharp, protruding broken bones. The overwhelming hunger clouds every other sensation and dulls the memories that had been flashing through my brain in a huge jumble. I walk to the entrance of the cavern. Alive. I was not a particularly strong or athletic man. Dead. I raise my holy hand and push the giant rock away from the cavern entrance as easily as brushing a dead leaf off. The two soldiers standing on guard scream like little children, as if they were the ones unarmed and dressed merely in a tattered shroud. Their arms do them no good, of course. I snatch their dull spears out of their hands. One drives his sword through me, the whites of his eyes flashing like a startled horse. I easily draw it out of my torso and toss it aside. Then, I grasp him tight as he turns to flee and bring my mouth down, fastening my sharp teeth in his muscular shoulder, tearing off chunks of flesh. Nothing has ever tasted so delicious since the dawn of time. I have pinned the other one down beneath my foot, and I take my time with my two-man feast. Soon enough, it is all done, and there is nothing but a pile of bloody bones and Roman armor, and yet my hunger is barely satiated. It stings me almost as sharply as the moment I set foot out of the cavern. I chew thoughtfully on the last delicious bits of sinew, thinking about where to find more flesh. I consider the bustling port of Aole, but somehow I do not quite feel ready to face the crowds yet. And, of course, my idiots. I'll have to deal with them, but for now, I just want to take pleasure in moving and eating freely. I've always had a soft spot for the taste of fish and salt. I set off towards the Azure coast. Some people saw it, but no one remembers buying it. An old, ugly wooden chair. Most people agreed on one single thing. It wasn't as ordinary as it seemed. Years later, it appeared at a rummage sale in a dusty town square. A young woman named Alara decided to buy it, as she was a collector of antiques. Arriving at her farmhouse, the young woman heard something splintering, but she didn't pay attention to it. She went inside and left the chair at the end of the foyer. The next day, the chair remained in its place, but its position was different. Although the strangest thing wasn't that, On top of it were several pieces of clothing the young woman didn't recognize. She was already beginning to doubt the chair. She went to her study and investigated its origin, but found nothing about it, only a note. If you see it, don't buy it. She knew she wasn't being paranoid. She went downstairs and turned her head, and the chair was no longer in its place. She searched the whole house, but couldn't find it. In an instant, it appeared behind her. She looked back, and what she saw left her speechless. The legs of the chair multiplied and stretched out like those of a spider. It lunged at the young woman, forcing her to sit. The chair bent in an impossible way, making the young woman disappear just like that. Only her clothes remained in the same place, on top of the chair. No one knows where the victims end up, if they end at all. What we do know is that the chair always ends up at the end of the foyer. When was the last time you saw your spouse? Officer Zepra asked. This morning, I replied, right before I left for work. He looked down as he wrote something on his little notepad. Did you speak with them at all after that? He looked back up at me. I shook my head. Is that normal? What do you mean? I asked him to clarify. Is it normal for your spouse to contact you while you're at work? Officer Zepre rephrased the question. Not really, I said. They know how busy I am and only contact me if they have something important to say. He wrote in his notepad again. Can you think of any reason why they might want to leave without telling you? He asked. If you're asking if there was a reason for them to leave me, the answer is no. I was offended by the implication. If anything, I'm the one who had a reason to leave, I thought. That person was insane. If they didn't have such a wealthy family who would ruin me if I tried to divorce them, I would have left years ago. Well, Officer Zepper said, I think I have all I need. He slid the notepad into his pocket before getting to his feet. Do you mind if I take a look around before I leave? He gestured toward the interior of the house. See if I see anything out of the ordinary. Help yourself, I said. Before he started his search of the house, he pulled a necklace out of his shirt and clasped the medallion that hung from the end of it. What's that? I asked. This is Saint Rita of Cascia, he explained as he showed me the medallion. She is the patron saint of lost causes, especially those involving women. At least that's what my mother always told me. This used to be hers before she passed. I didn't know how to respond to that, so I kept my mouth shut. Do you mind if I look around on my own? He asked when he saw that I was prepared to follow him. This may sound silly, but I like to talk to Saint Rita, asking for her help and guidance, and I'm a little self-conscious about it. Yeah, go ahead, I gestured. But you won't find anything here. Eskar. I'm done, Officer Zephyr said 15 minutes later. Did Saint Rita offer any advice? I asked in jest. It doesn't work like that, he replied. But if she can help, she will, he said. She always does. After he left, I celebrated by cracking open a bottle of champagne and drinking while singing, Ding dong, the witch is dead. Ixi, I must have had a little too much to drink, because when I woke up, I was sprawled out on the couch. The first thing I noticed when I sat up was that I had an extremely full bladder. I pulled myself to my feet and staggered toward the bathroom. I had managed about a dozen steps before I suddenly tripped over something. When I looked to see what it was, I was shocked to see my spouse's severed forearm lying on the floor. What the fuck? I threw you in a storm drain on the edge of the city. Shh. Things got crazier from there. I hadn't noticed it at first, but there was a black Sharpie marker in my spouse's dismembered hand. As I stood there staring in shock, the hand began writing a message on the tiled floor. The rest of me will be along shortly, the message said. My new neighbor was gorgeous. Classic good looks with long blonde hair, blue eyes, and a dimple on one cheek. I envied whoever was her boyfriend. One day, I saw her standing by the fence. I said hello and walked over. Could you help me with something? She asked. Of course. What is it? My shower drain is clogged. Sure. Let me get my tools and I'll be right there. I went and got my tool, which was a bent wire coat hanger, then brushed my teeth and combed my hair. I went to her back door. She was waiting for me. but now she was wearing a full-length silk robe, black, with something like Celtic symbols in gold. She took me to her bedroom and showed me the ensuite bathroom. "It's in there," she said apologetically. I snagged the clump of hair with my tool, turned around, and triumphantly showed her the disgusting clump. She smiled and said, "Oh, thank you." Then the sleeve of her silk robe slipped off her shoulder. She said sweetly, "Oops." Her robe slid further, and she stared at me with her brilliant smile. The next thing I knew, we were both having the time of our lives. Her skin was incredibly soft and smooth. Her lips were full and eager, and together we did anything and everything we could imagine. After 4 hours, we were spent. She thanked me again for removing the clog and said, "Good night," as she closed the back door. I couldn't believe it. This kind of thing didn't happen to average-looking guys like me. I assumed it was a once-in-a-lifetime adventure. That's not how things went. Every week she invited me over, and it was grand. I kept looking for signs of a boyfriend who was, say, working on an oil platform for 6 months at a time, or maybe somebody on deployment. Not for a second did I believe that it was because I was the most attractive man she had ever seen. I started having trouble in my life. I was written up at work for making stupid mistakes. I didn't care. I was happy all the time, not just the one day a week I could see her. She had improved my life immeasurably. My sister visited a few months later because I stopped responding to her texts. She had a very serious expression when I opened the door. "I'm worried about you," she said simply. "Have you been to the doctor lately?" She insisted on driving me to the doctor a few weeks later. I thought it would ease her mind when I told her that the doctor gave me a clean bill of health. But the more I thought about the whole scenario, the more I wanted another opinion. Maybe the doctor would have an answer to what was going on. When he walked into the exam room, the doctor did a quick check of the file on the screen. He asked, "How old are you?" "I'm 24. Why?" He hesitated, then said, "I would assume you were in your 50s by your appearance. When did your hair turn gray?" "I don't know." Then the truth tumbled out of me. "You see, I've had this gorgeous woman in my life for the last 6 months, and she can't get enough of me. It's incredible. She is drop-dead gorgeous." "Why does she want to be with me?" the doctor asked. "Could I please see your driver's license?" I showed him and he said, "Ah, I see." The doctor sighed and said, "I have seen something like this before, but I hesitate to bring it up. Tell me, I have to know." The doctor sat down. "Tell me, I have to know." The doctor sat down. "This will sound bizarre, but I think you have an attachment." "Like a parasite?" "Sort of. I think your new friend is a succubus. She gets her energy from men, not from food. Have you ever seen her eat?" I thought for a moment. Surprisingly, I hadn't. She will drain you over and over until it kills you. "I know. It sounds too strange to be real, but look at your driver's license photo. Take a hard look at it." I saw that I really had aged in the last 6 months. Why didn't I see this before? My cousin went through this. He was very happy up until the day he died, 9 months after he started dating his dream girl. We've all done crazy things for love, but this isn't about love. It's about her needing your life energy. You have it, she needs it, and you're giving it to her. She will kill you. I told my sister I was slightly anemic and would be taking iron supplements. She was relieved. The more I thought about it, the more I realized the doctor was right. I had a succubus. I had to talk to my girl about it. 1 month later, we moved to Savannah to see a witch she knew. I wanted to be turned into an incubus. I could feed off other women, then bring it home to share with her. It wasn't a great plan, but it was all we had. After an excruciating ritual, 3 days buried in dirt, several prayers, and a sacrifice, I became an incubus. I looked like I was 20 years old again. I had incredible energy until I suddenly dropped. As long as I could feed in time, I could make it back to my girl and feed her. She was happy, I was happy, all was well. Still, I had this nagging feeling. It was too good to be true, and I never did ask about what this lifestyle did to my soul. But when I looked at my beautiful girl, as long as we were together, what could go wrong? May be wrong, was me turning into an incubus, but what could I do? I am never going back. Mara turned to Aiden. She wasn't tired. Vampires don't get tired, but she was bored and wanted to leave. Aiden, however, was entranced and showed no sign of becoming restless, which was surprising because usually he was the one ready to bolt, get the hell out of wherever they were, and seek safety in their sanctuaries. Now, however, he was looking up at old Valerius, spewing his usual mumbo-jumbo, his eyes shining. It was the same with Tam, darling old Tam, standing next to Aiden. His lips were moving slowly, trying to follow Valerius's speech. Mara sighed. Aiden was her true and only companion, and Tam was her cousin. She and Tam had been turned together, actually, and she loved them both dearly, but the obsession with Valerius was becoming a bit much. She had no desire to go hunting in the catacombs guarded by Roman spears and swords. It wasn't their fault. Valerius remained old and ugly no matter what he drank, and drinking the blood of a crucified criminal, even if not quite dead, was a bit much anyway. Aiden, she plucked at his sleeve. Aiden couldn't hear her over Valerius's lunatic ravings, sipping immortal blood, closer to the godhead. The gray, stretchy skin over his bald head moved in sync with his words, and she felt herself overcome by loathing and disgust. She hated him so much. And now he was putting their whole clan in danger. Let's go. Her cry happened to time with a pause from Valerius, and it rang through the basilica. Everyone turned their heads to look at her, while Valerius's beady steel eyes seemed to stab through her. The look on his face was the exact same as when he had hunted her down before turning her, not so long ago. She had a flashback, Tam screaming, blood spurting. Although she enjoyed her life these days, she had never forgiven Valerius. Aiden said, "Shh," loudly, willing everyone to turn away from them, but Valerius raised a skinny arm. "Does Magdalene have something to say?" "You wish to speak, child?" One of the babies, stretched and hanging on a rope next to Valerius, twitched. Mara hoped that it was just a death twitch, that the baby was dead. Valerius couldn't shake the belief that babies would make him look young again, despite all evidence to the contrary. Mara was not skilled in public speaking. She groped for words. The catacombs are dangerous. His followers, mad. I heard one speak last night. They're sure he's alive. Wrong words. Valerius was visibly aroused. "Thank you, child, thank you," he exclaimed, almost dancing with delight and enthusiasm. "My friends, my family, you will accompany me on this glorious mission. A mortal who raises mortals from the dead, who is not dead himself, despite the most cruel crucifixion. Elevate our species." His voice rose higher, almost a shriek. The baby twitched again, and Mara heard a very faint cry, piercing through Valerius's ravings. She brought her lips to Aiden's ear. "Let's take the baby and leave." She didn't even know if she was merely expressing a fantasy, or if she really wanted to do something so impossible. Aiden's eyes widened in surprise. He gripped Mara's hand. "Are you crazy?" Her whisper hadn't been low enough. Tam had heard her too. Without looking at her, he cried out, "Valerius, she wants to take that baby." Another silence fell, and Mara felt a slight spinning. Valerius was looking at her again. Mara stuttered. "No." The basilica seemed to shift. Aiden disentangled her fingers from his, taking an imperceptible step away. Mara said louder, "No." Fear was gathering in her heart. Valerius said softly, a sacrifice for the success of our mission." His voice rose on the last words, becoming a command. The crowd swayed toward Mara. The baby cried again, but now Mara, glimpsing through them, couldn't see it hanging from the rope anymore, just the very still ones. Tam grabbed her arm. "You sniveling bitch, nothing but whinge and whine." Mara heard him snarling under his breath. "Tam, please, Aiden." She shrieked in terror, twisting her head looking for Aiden, who seemed to have melted into the crowd of faces streaked with bloodlust. "A sacrifice," screamed Valerius, and the crowd repeated, chant like, "sacrifice," pushing Mara towards the front. Mara stumbled, the multiple sharp, strong hands pushing and pulling her. Her limbs, her hair falling out of her headdress. Then she heard the baby cry again, very clearly, very close to her. She looked up, pushing her hair out of her face. Someone she didn't recognize was holding the baby to her. The crowd seemed to blur in the background, their chant becoming almost a hum. "Take the baby and leave, Magdalene." Obviously, the stranger holding the baby was talking to her, a crystal clear but also a very normal human voice. For an instant, Tam's face swam into clear sight, and behind him, Valerius, their faces twisted into savage bloodlust, reaching out for her. Galvanized into action, Mara snatched the baby. A path cleared for her, the stranger holding his arms wide to keep the crowd off Mara. The baby smelled of warm milk and sweet human flesh. Holding it tight, Mara flew through the path. She could hear Valerius' shrieking behind her, and for a split second, she glimpsed Aiden calling her name, his pet name for her, begging her to stay. She didn't stop, racing into the black night. The heat and smells and noises melted away. She was alone with the baby by the cliffs, the only sound that of gentle, crashing waves. "And here is our final new patient for the night," the nurse said, stopping by a thick glass door. "Ah, yes, Ron Okrask. He's an interesting one," Dr. Tweeve replied. "Are you aware of his situation?" "No, doctor. But there was a note on his file marking him a possible danger to himself or others." "That doesn't surprise me, to be honest. Mr. Okrask was a widely respected researcher with a focus on biomechanical engineering at the university. It is my understanding that he fell asleep in his lab and was startled awake by one of his students. He claimed that the student was replaced in some manner and savagely beat him. He then went home, accosting another 2 pedestrians on the way for the same reason, before finally attacking his wife and teenage son, which is when the police found him. He was taken to trial, where he pleaded not guilty, against his lawyer's recommendation. Because he attempted to attack the judge upon entering the chamber, he was remanded to our institution and found guilty in absentia, a tragic case of a genius losing his mind. "I can hear you, you know," came a voice from within the room, "and I'm not crazy." The man stood up from his cot and walked over to the door. "Of course you aren't, Mr. Okrazeg," the nurse said, "but we're here to help you." "No, you're not. You're not. You're one of them. You there, doctor, in the lab coat. Don't trust it. It looks like a person, sounds like one. Hell, they even bleed like we do. But that thing is not a person. I don't know what they want, but they don't mean us any good." "This is very interesting, Mr. Okraj," Dr. Twee said. "I wonder if you would be willing to take a few moments to examine these beliefs. Not a lot else to do here. And if I can convince you that they're real, I have a better shot at getting out of this place and figuring out what they want. So go ahead." "Is this a good idea, doctor? We don't want to feed into his delusions." "Don't worry, nurse. I know how to talk about this kind of delusion without feeding it." The doctor looked at the patient. "Mr. Okraj, would you please share how these ideas have manifested? What makes you so sure that they were not, as they seemed, your colleagues and family?" "The first thing I notice is their eyes. They don't blink. I don't know if their eyelids won't allow it, but they never blink. The way they breathe, inhale, exhale, but it sounds like a hiss, like there's some kind of bellows in their chests." Akrazag's face was turning red as he began to pant. "And they walk all wrong. Mechanically and too exact, like some kind of robot marching in step. They try to mimic us, but they can't, not really." He was holding himself up on the door. "Mr. Akrazag, please calm down," Dr. Twy hurriedly said. "You look like you're having a panic attack. Are you feeling all right?" No. They're trying to keep me quiet, keep me from sharing the truth. They don't want. He trailed off, puffing and wheezing, before collapsing. Immediately, the nurse pulled out a key ring and unlocked the door, rushing to his side, Dr. Tuia right behind her. She took his pulse before saying, "His heart is racing. I'm worried he's going into cardiac arrest." The doctor ran for the defibrillator in the hallway. He was gone for barely a minute, but he returned to the nurse performing CPR. His heart stopped. "Call a code." One very long hour later, Dr. Twice and the nurse began to fill out paperwork for the death of Ron Okrash. Cause of death, heart failure. It was in practically every manner an ordinary tragedy. A man suffering from an intense mental break overexcited himself and triggered a previously unknown heart condition. But Twiha couldn't forget his final moments. He had been so sure that Okraj was just having a panic attack, not entering heart failure, and he had left the nurse alone with the patient just before he died. It was absurd, of course, but the seeds of doubt were planted. Over the next few days, Twihe found himself studying his colleagues' behaviors more closely. Did she actually blink? It looked like she did, but that could be a trick of his eyes. There were times she seemed to look ahead for far longer than should be possible, eyes wide and staring. And her gait. She moved her legs in an exacting manner, each one raising to a precise angle before the knee swung forward and the foot came down. Surely it was just because of her shoes. Right? Her breathing was another thing Twee couldn't help but notice. It was a wheezy noise coming from her chest. He thought she had mentioned asthma once or twice, but was that just an excuse? The anxiety built and built until he could hardly tell what was real and what was a product of his imagination. He was fine until he saw her watching him in the mirror one day, peering at him with a smirk on her face. She knew that he knew, and he knew that she knew, that there was nothing he could do about it. Almost nothing. There was one way to stop it. A tragic case, said the nurse. One of the best psychologists over at the Mercy Sanitarium just couldn't take the stress, snapped, attacked one of the orderlies. Poor man was taken here, ranting and raving. Keeps claiming people have been replaced. It's actually my youngest son's cat who learned to use the buttons. I inherited the cat after my son lost control of his car on the icy roads last winter. It happened on the day he received a scholarship to his top college choice. He and his boyfriend were feeling on top of the world and were on their way back home from a trip. His boyfriend survived. He did not. You cannot imagine the grief. Either you have experienced the loss of a child, or you have experienced the loss of a child, or you haven't. I did not weep. Not at the funeral, nor for many weeks after. I became a stone, an object. It was as if all the sorrow were locked far from reach. Instead of feeling anything, I simply thought many times of retrieving the pistol that I own from its case in the back of my closet. And on a few occasions, I even went and took it and sat with it, feeling its weight in my hand. My son Niv Vin Y to his friends was my world. One day he would have been famous, I am sure of it. You may think that is a father's pride talking. Maybe it is. But he had a music scholarship. He would have performed for presidents and world leaders. In my mind, when I see him, it is usually at his piano, playing for his cat. When he was 15, I promised him a kitten if he did well in school, and he picked out this tabby, the tiniest and angriest tabby in the world, and named her Retire. She loved only him, and hissed and growled at anyone else who came near, including me. She also peed on his clothes, and on mine, and on my bed. To say I wanted to get rid of Terrible Retire, as I called her, is an understatement. But then my brilliant son died, and suddenly it was just me and Terrible Retire and the gun. I felt nothing but resentment toward the cat. But she spent hours and hours slouched on the windowsill in his bedroom where she always sat while he played piano. I used to think she sat there to watch the birds and couldn't care less about his playing. Now, she didn't even lift her head, she just loafed on the sill, as if waiting for him to come bursting in and pull the dust cover off and play. And there were the buttons. You've seen them, I'm sure. Those gimmicky buttons that people get to train animals to talk. Bunch of nonsense if you ask me. What has a dog got to say? Nothing but food, probably. And anyway, people are supposed to give commands to dogs, not the other way around. But Niv would watch all these videos of dogs and sometimes cats pressing the buttons, even though, to be honest, the cat videos he showed me looked like the cats walking onto the buttons completely by accident. And that's what I told him. Complete waste of money. People wishfully projecting their ideas onto their pets. The cat pressed, "Love you," and meant it. Ha! Cats only know hunger and selfish desires. Well, my stubborn, dreamy-eyed, cat-loving son bought a set of those buttons. He pre-recorded dozens of them, but began with just a handful. Ceph-OV, Subtle, Outside, Music, Dad, and NivH. Osh, yes, he put me and himself as buttons, and music too, because he was convinced in his silly teenage way that the cat liked his music and might want to request it. Retire was terrified of those buttons. No matter how he tried to train her, she refused to use them. She hissed. She swatted. She wouldn't go near them. She knew exactly what they were for, I'm sure of it. She even knew the words, because he'd say to her, "Let's have some music," and she would go to her perch by the piano and wait for him. But when it came to the buttons, she refused. Retire loved those buttons about as much as I loved Retire. But then, like I said, came the accident. Suddenly my son was gone. The house felt wrong. Empty. Retire was a husk. I put fruit out, but she didn't eat. I didn't know how to read her signals. She hissed at me if I came near. I decided I should get rid of her. I couldn't keep his cat. The cat hated me anyway. I will get rid of her, I thought, and then I will be done with me too. See. But I couldn't bring myself to get rid of my son's cat, and I couldn't shoot myself while the cat was still alive. And so we were stuck, me and the cat. And then one night, I was up in my room contemplating the gun when I heard the recorded voice, downstairs, speak, NIVH. I assumed it must be a mistake. She must have walked over the button. But then it came again. NIVH. SNIVH. SNIVH. I stood there, listening to that cat press NIVH over and over, and tears came into my eyes. It was like a key turning in a lock, a crack in the dam that then finally burst. I gasped. Loud, gulping sobs. Finally, the tears came from my son. And when the flood was over, I came down and found tiny Retire sitting by the buttons, looking miserable, and I scooped her up and told her, I miss him too. And for once, she didn't swat me. She gave only the smallest growl. I put her down and got her some food. Got myself some too. We both ate. That was the beginning. Since then, I've added more buttons. You see, I'm not an animal person. I didn't understand Retire's body language, her wants and needs without the buttons. She finally started using them, training me. I guess they say cats do that. She has a C-wet food button, a kibble button. She has a CS no-ebble button. She has a snow-ebble button to use if I show her the wrong food. I also added from my son's collection the Fluvyers button. Yes, I confess, I did add it, and a car tire button. And I began to make a habit of pressing Cluv your Neve and Love your Retire. I was genuinely in shock how much she communicated. The first time she pressed DAD Love Yours, I almost broke down all over. I couldn't believe it. She looked like she wasn't even trying. She just casually walked over the buttons. But it was deliberate. It happened more than once. I still hadn't learned to read her cat body language at all, but with the buttons, I understood her, and I felt like I had a part of my son with me. Sometimes she said things that just cracked open my soul. Like when she looked at me with those big round eyes one time and hit NIVH home. I wish he was home, too, I told her. It was uncanny, the things we could discuss. We'd have entire conversations. I know it sounds nuts. I'd have thought myself nuts just a couple of months before. But I added buttons so fast, and she took to all of them. I asked her once if she understood what happened to Niv. She replied with NIVH by E. BYE. By age died, I'd added the DBYE, by age by E, button to tell her whenever I was leaving the house. Then she asked me NIH home. I had to tell her no, NIVH home. And she stubbornly insisted again, NIVH home. And she walked away, angry, I think, that I couldn't make Niv come back. But the reason I'm sharing this story, and sharing this story here, is because of what happened last week. Last week, my son Milek came to see me. Milek is Nev's older half-brother. He's nearly a decade older than Neve from a previous relationship, and unfortunately, Milek inherited all of his mother's worst traits. It is always the same with him. He begs for money, gets abusive if I do not give it, and disappears once I have made him a loan he will never repay. I cut off all funds to him a few years ago and told him I would no longer enable his habits. While I'd never cut him entirely out of my life, I hadn't allowed him to visit when Niv was alive because of the way he'd treated Niv on a previous visit, when he'd sneeringly accused me of favoring that mincing little. I won't repeat his hateful words for his younger brother. When he showed up on my doorstep, he had the smell of whiskey on his breath, and he looked wild-eyed and anxious. "Dad," he said, and then hugged me tight. "I'm sorry about Niv. It shocked me so much, I hugged him right back, and he came in and sat down and asked how I was doing. He was surprisingly solicitous. I didn't understand why. His usual meanness didn't come through at all until he noticed a growling retire. "You still have that little piss queen?" he asked, and reached a hand for her, only for her to swat and run away. "Little shit," he said. "Her name is Retire," I said defensively. He laughed. "Didn't you used to call her Terrible Retire? She doesn't pee on things anymore." From the button area came presses of BYE, BYE. "She wants you to go bye-bye," I said. "She can fuck off. She's not your son. I am." ABYE, by E, by E, BYE, BYE. So if I didn't like the way he talked to the cat, though a few minutes later after she peed on his shoes, I found his anger more understandable, and I locked her up to prevent him from harming her. But he seemed genuinely sad about Neve, and even asked about Neve's boyfriend and his recovery after the crash. I wondered if he had come over to try to patch things up between us, maybe to start off on better footing, like me and Retire had, until he asked me what was going to happen to Neve's college fund. "I haven't decided yet," I told him. "I'm still processing all of this." "But like, he's not going to use it, right? I mean, even before the accident. The money you'd been saving for him, he had a scholarship, right? He wasn't going to need it, and he definitely won't need it now. Dad, I could use a loan." "Milek, you still have one son left, Dad," he burst, and there was the old rage. "Why do you always treat me like this? Even when he's dead, he still deserves more than I do. I bet you cut me out of your will too, huh?" "I did not. You did not." "You didn't?" "No. You both get equal shares. I have a lot of resentment, I guess. I'm sorry. What about the loan? Is there any way? I will have to think on it." Okay. You think, "I'll make us drinks, okay?" I should have known what was happening when he went into the kitchen and was fumbling around longer than necessary. I should have known, but how could I? I had already lost one son. How could I suspect the other? How could I imagine the worst? I wanted to believe things would be better. I drank the alcohol he put in front of me without thinking. I assumed the wooziness was just the booze. It had been a long time since I'd had a real drink. Somewhere, in the bedroom where she was locked up, Retire was howling her little heart out. I'd never heard her make those sounds and said I was going to let her out, but when I got up, the whole world lurched. Malek's arms caught me, and he said, "Got you, Dad," and then kept whispering in my ear, his breath still reeking, Sorry, but you're making me do this. If you just give me that fucking loan." I didn't start to panic, really panic, until he propped me up on the sofa and went upstairs with the question, "You still keep your gun in the closet?" The fear hit me in a wave then. I felt like I was floating, like I was drifting away from my body. Like I was lost in some strange and horrible dream. I tried to stand, to stumble to the table and grab my phone, but I fell and heard the crack of my head against the table's edge. The ground came up to meet me. Pain shot through my skull. Footsteps thudded overhead, cursing as he rifled through my closet. I tried to pull myself up again. Finally managed to grab my phone. The screen swam in my vision. My fingers were fat and clumsy as I tried to push the keys to call for help. A hand smacked the phone out of my grip. "It's 'cause you won't help me," Milek rambled as he again wrapped his arms around me to try to get me onto the sofa. "Everyone knows you're depressed, suicidal, can't handle Neve's death. You should have just done it, man. If you'd just done it, I wouldn't have to. Pluh, I gasped. This is the only way. This is how it was going to be anyway. You don't even want to live anyway. In your own way, you're helping me out here in the end, he said. And then, in response to the howling from the other room, he suddenly shrieked, "Shut the fuck up!" The howling stopped. Malik glared toward the door, his breaths coming hard and fast, then looked back at me. Everything had become so blurry. His words were a garble, his features a haze. I felt the cold muzzle of the gun against my temple as my heart galloped in my chest. From Neve's room came a sharp rustle, like a curtain or a sheet, and then the piano, the notes of a piano. The hell? Milik's voice slurred through my drugged haze. Is someone here? The playing continued, unsteady but beautiful. Unmistakably, Claire de Lune. Just like Neve had always played, but slower, halting. And I wondered, it couldn't be the cat, could it? It almost sounded like the cat walking deliberately across the keys, the same way she walked across the buttons. But that would have been impossible. WHO's there, snarled Milek. Niv was all I could manage. He snatched up the gun and stalked toward the bedroom door. In my blurry vision, he wavered back and forth. And when he opened the door, there, at the piano, was a figure, flickering and impossible. A figure that both was and was not there, and Milek screamed and raised his arm, and the world exploded as the gun went off. And then there was the yowling of the cat. And the cat came charging out, all bristling like a tiger, and with her that same figure from the piano, and Milek was screaming in terror, and fired the gun again, and ran out the door. What I remember next is waking in the ER. Neighbors apparently called police after hearing the gunshots. When I was discharged and returned home, my head wrapped from the concussion, I was relieved to find Retire whole and unharmed. She hurried over to greet me, tail up. I'd finally started picking up her body language to know a greeting when I saw it. But it wasn't just the tabby greeting me I knew. You see, I'd finally realized something. A cat can't play a piano. And this hack cat couldn't use buttons. Not of her own volition. Maybe it hadn't been Retire talking to me all along. Maybe it was, and always had been, Niv. And so as I extended my hand and Retire rubbed my knuckles, I told her, I love you. I won't ever hurt myself. I promise. I will survive. You can be free. I love you. Retire rubbed my hand again, and rubbed my face when I bent my head to hers. Then she padded over to the buttons and walked across them, and I listened to my son's recorded voice, a love you, my, bye. But every once in a while, when I'm very deep in dreams, I think I hear the sound of the piano.